Mark Antony was married to Octavia, the sister of his rival Octavian, when he began his relationship with Cleopatra. The marriage to Octavia was itself a political arrangement, designed to cement the uneasy alliance between Antony and Octavian after Caesar's assassination. Octavia was reportedly a good wife, loyal, patient, dignified, everything that Roman society expected from a noblewoman. She bore Antony 2 daughters and managed his household in Rome while he was away on campaign. She was, by all accounts, blameless in the breakdown of their marriage, and yet Antony abandoned her, publicly humiliated her by returning her gifts and sending her away, and eventually divorced her to formalize his relationship with Cleopatra. This decision was political suicide in Roman terms. It gave Octavian a perfect propaganda weapon, turned Roman opinion decisively against Antony, and contributed directly to the war that would destroy him. Why would a rational politician make such a catastrophically bad decision unless he was genuinely in love with the woman he chose over his Roman wife? The answer reveals the complexity of the Antony-Cleopatra relationship. Antony did not choose Cleopatra over Octavia because of irrational passion. He chose her because his entire power base had shifted to the east, because his strategic position depended on Egyptian resources, because his vision of the future no longer included cooperation with Octavian and therefore no longer required maintaining the marriage alliance. The emotional attachment was real, but it was always embedded in and shaped by political calculation. This was not a man choosing love over duty. This was a man whose love and duty had become aligned in the same direction, pointing toward Alexandria and away from Rome. Before we examine how this relationship developed and what it meant for both partners, we need to understand who Mark Antony was and why he needed Cleopatra as desperately as she needed him. If you find stories of power, politics, and the blurred line between love and strategy compelling, consider subscribing to join us as we explore more of history's most complex relationships. Mark Antony was 41 years old when he met Cleopatra at Tarsus in 41 BC, and he was already one of the most powerful men in the Roman world. He had served as Julius Caesar's second-in-command during the conquest of Gaul and the civil war against Pompey. He had been Caesar's master of horse, his most trusted lieutenant, the man who held Rome while Caesar was away on campaign. He had delivered the famous funeral oration after Caesar's assassination, turning the Roman mob against the conspirators and setting in motion the events that would destroy Brutus and Cassius. He had formed the second triumvirate with Octavian and Lepidus, dividing the Roman world between them and crushing Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. By 41 BC, he controlled the eastern half of the Roman Empire, while Octavian controlled the western half, and their rivalry was becoming increasingly obvious despite their nominal alliance. Antony's character was complex and contradictory in ways that would define his relationship with Cleopatra. He was a brilliant military commander who had proven himself in campaign after campaign, but he was also prone to lapses in judgment and periods of depression when things went wrong. He was charismatic and popular with his soldiers, who loved his informality and his willingness to share their hardships, but he was also capable of cruelty and autocratic behavior when he felt threatened. He enjoyed luxury and pleasure but could also endure extreme privation on campaign. He had a strong sense of personal loyalty, but could be ruthless when political necessity demanded it. Roman sources portrayed him as dissolute and pleasure-seeking, more interested in banquets and entertainment than in governance. But this characterization was propaganda designed to explain why he allied with Cleopatra. The real Antony was far more capable than the caricature suggests, and his relationship with Cleopatra was far more strategic. The meeting at Tarsus in 41 BC was not a chance encounter, but a carefully planned political summit. Antony had summoned Cleopatra to answer questions about her loyalty during the civil war between him and Cassius and Brutus. Egypt had not provided significant support to either side, maintaining a careful neutrality that Antony found suspicious. He needed to ensure that Cleopatra would support his planned invasion of Parthia, the great Eastern Empire that had humiliated Rome by destroying Crassus's legions at Carrhae in 53 BC. Antony intended to succeed where Crassus had failed, and Egyptian resources would be essential for such a massive campaign. He needed Cleopatra's grain to feed his armies, her gold to pay his soldiers, her ships to transport his supplies. This was not a request for a favor. This was a demand for cooperation backed by the implicit threat of Roman military intervention if she refused. Cleopatra understood exactly what was at stake when she received Antony's summons. She had already secured Egypt's independence through her alliance with Julius Caesar, but Caesar was dead and his protection was gone. She had navigated the civil war carefully, avoiding commitment to either side until the outcome was clear. Now the winner was demanding an accounting, and she needed to convince him that an alliance with Egypt served his interests better than conquest and annexation. She also needed to establish a personal relationship that would protect her if the political situation changed, that would give her leverage beyond what Egypt's resources alone could provide. The golden barge that she sailed to Tarsus, with its purple sails and silver oars and musicians playing flutes and lyres, the costume as Aphrodite surrounded by attendants dressed as cupids and nymphs, these were calculated to achieve exactly that effect. She was demonstrating wealth, sophistication, cultural refinement, and most importantly, her understanding that relationships with powerful Romans required managing their expectations and their egos from the very first encounter. The relationship that developed over the following months in Alexandria combined political negotiation with personal attraction in ways that neither party had necessarily anticipated. Antony spent the winter of 41–40 BC in Egypt, ostensibly preparing for his Parthian campaign, but actually enjoying the pleasures of Cleopatra's court. They formed what ancient sources called the Inimitable Livers, a dining club dedicated to elaborate banquets and entertainment that became legendary for its extravagance. Plutarch recorded stories of competitions over who could host the most expensive dinner, of pearls dissolved in vinegar, of disguises and practical jokes and late-night adventures through the streets of Alexandria. The famous story of the pearl dissolved in vinegar captures both the extravagance and the strategic theater of their relationship. According to Pliny the Elder, Cleopatra wagered that she could consume 10 million sesterces in a single banquet. When Antony expressed skepticism, she took one of her pearl earrings, supposedly the largest and most valuable pearls in the world, and dropped it into a cup of vinegar. After it dissolved, she drank the mixture, winning the wager. Modern scientists have questioned whether vinegar could actually dissolve a pearl quickly enough to make this story plausible, but the story itself reveals something important about how Cleopatra operated. She was demonstrating not just wealth, but a casual attitude toward wealth, showing that she could afford to waste resources that would beggar kingdoms. She was also demonstrating theatrical flair and a willingness to take risks for dramatic effect. These were exactly the qualities that would appeal to Antony, who valued boldness and spectacle. The disguises and street adventures that Plutarch mentions reveal another dimension of their relationship. Antony and Cleopatra would reportedly dress as common people and wander through Alexandria at night, playing pranks on citizens and engaging in behavior that would have been scandalous if anyone had recognized them. This informality was completely inconsistent with the dignity expected of rulers, but it was entirely consistent with Antony's personality. He'd always been more comfortable with soldiers than with aristocrats, more at home in camp than in the Senate. Cleopatra's willingness to participate in these adventures demonstrated that she understood him and could match his energy and his appetite for experience. This was not the behavior of a seductress manipulating a victim. This was two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company, finding ways to escape the constraints of their positions. This behavior has been interpreted as evidence that Antony was bewitched and corrupted by Eastern luxury, that he abandoned Roman virtue for Egyptian decadence, but it is more accurately understood as the development of a personal bond that served both parties' political interests while also providing genuine pleasure and companionship. The strategic logic of their alliance was obvious from the beginning. Antony needed Egyptian resources for his Parthian campaign and for his eventual confrontation with Octavian. Cleopatra needed Roman protection against the constant threat of annexation and Roman support for her dynasty's continuation. An alliance served both sets of interests, and personal affection made that alliance stronger and more reliable than a purely transactional relationship would be. The 3 children born to them between 40 BC and 36 BC were products of this alliance, as well as products of their relationship. Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, the twins born in 40 BC, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, born in 36 BC, tied Antony to Egypt with bonds that could not be easily broken and gave Cleopatra additional security through children who connected her to Roman power. The names of these children reveal the ambitions and the cultural fusion that characterize their parents' relationship. Alexander Helios means Alexander the Sun, invoking both Alexander the Great and the solar symbolism of Egyptian and Eastern religion. Cleopatra. Selene means Cleopatra the Moon, creating a complementary pair with her twin brother that represented cosmic unity. Ptolemy Philadelphus meant Ptolemy the brother loving, recalling one of the greatest Ptolemaic pharaohs and emphasizing dynastic continuity. These were not merely personal names, but political statements, declarations that these children represented a new synthesis of Greek, Egyptian, and Roman power. They were being raised as princes and princesses of a future empire that would unite East and West under a new dynasty that combined the best of all 3 traditions. The children were also insurance policies for both parents. If Antony died in battle or by assassination, his children with Cleopatra would still connect her to his legacy and to his faction within Roman politics. If Cleopatra died, Antony could claim to rule Egypt as regent for his children, maintaining his Eastern power base. If both parents survived but their relationship soured, the children would give them continuing reasons to cooperate rather than become enemies. This was sophisticated dynastic planning that went far beyond the immediate emotional bond between the parents. But Antony's relationship with Cleopatra created immediate problems for his position in Roman politics. His marriage to Octavia had been arranged in 40 BC to seal his alliance with Octavian, and abandoning her for a foreign queen was seen as a betrayal of that alliance and a rejection of Roman values. The situation was complicated by Antony's disastrous Parthian campaign of 36 BC, which ended in humiliating defeat and massive casualties. Antony had invaded Parthia with a huge army, confident that he would succeed where Crassus had failed and that victory would establish him as Rome's greatest general. Instead, he lost perhaps a third of his army to Parthian tactics, winter hardship, and supply problems. He retreated back to Syria, having accomplished nothing except the waste of Roman lives and Egyptian treasure. This defeat should have destroyed Antony's credibility and his relationship with Cleopatra. She had invested enormous resources in the campaign and had nothing to show for it except dead soldiers and empty treasuries. A purely transactional political alliance might have collapsed at this point, with Cleopatra cutting her losses and looking for a new Roman patron. Instead, she met Antony in Syria with fresh supplies and reinforcements, demonstrating her continued commitment to their partnership despite the catastrophic failure. This support, at the moment of crisis, reveals something important about the nature of their relationship. It was strong enough to survive major setbacks because it was built on more than just immediate mutual benefit. Octavian exploited this brilliantly, portraying Antony as a man who had abandoned his virtuous Roman wife for an Egyptian temptress, who had chosen Eastern luxury over Roman discipline, who had been corrupted and enslaved by a foreign woman. The propaganda was devastatingly effective because it played on existing Roman prejudices about the East, about women, and about proper masculine behavior. A Roman man could have foreign mistresses, but he was supposed to maintain his marriage to his Roman wife and keep his foreign entanglements discreet. Antony did the opposite. He publicly acknowledged his children with Cleopatra, spent years with her in Alexandria, and eventually divorced Octavia to formalize their relationship. This was not the behavior of a man who had been bewitched. This was the behavior of a man who had made a calculated decision that his future lay in the East and that maintaining Roman respectability was less important than securing Egyptian support. The donations of Alexandria in 34 BC demonstrated how completely Antony had committed to this Eastern strategy. In an elaborate ceremony in Alexandria, Antony distributed territories across the East to Cleopatra and her children. Cleopatra was proclaimed Queen of Kings. Caesarion was recognized as King of Kings and co-ruler of Egypt, and Antony's 3 children with Cleopatra were given various kingdoms and territories: Armenia, Media, Parthia, Cyrenaica, Libya, Phoenicia, Syria, and Cilicia. Some of these territories were not actually under Roman control, and others were Roman provinces that had no business being given away as if they were personal property. The donations were clearly intended to establish an Eastern power structure independent of and rival to Rome, with Cleopatra and her children as the royal house, and Antony as the Roman general who supported and legitimized their rule. This ceremony was Antony's declaration of independence from Rome and from Octavian, and it guaranteed war. Octavian used the donations as evidence that Antony planned to move the capital of the empire to Alexandria, to rule as an Eastern despot with Cleopatra as his queen, to give away Roman territory to foreign royalty. The Senate declared war, officially against Cleopatra, not against Antony, because a war against a foreign queen was more acceptable than a civil war against a fellow Roman. But everyone understood that this was Antony's war as much as Cleopatra's, and the outcome would determine whether Rome remained a Mediterranean power centered in Italy or became part of a larger empire centered in Alexandria. The question of whether Antony and Cleopatra genuinely loved each other becomes almost unanswerable, because love and strategy were so completely intertwined in their relationship. The ancient sources provide contradictory evidence. Plutarch emphasizes Antony's passion and Cleopatra's hold over him, suggesting genuine emotional attachment. But Plutarch also makes clear that the relationship served both parties' political interests and that neither was foolish enough to let emotion override calculation. Cassius Dio presents the relationship more cynically, suggesting that Antony used Cleopatra for her resources and she used him for protection, with affection as a convenient addition rather than the primary motivation. Modern historians have debated the issue endlessly without reaching consensus, because the evidence genuinely does not allow us to separate the emotional from the political with any certainty. What we can say with confidence is that their relationship was not the simple seduction narrative that Roman propaganda portrayed. Cleopatra did not bewitch Antony with beauty and sex. She offered him a partnership that served his strategic interests, while also providing companionship and understanding that his Roman wives apparently did not. Antony did not abandon Rome for love. He shifted his power base to the east because he recognized that his conflict with Octavian was irreconcilable, and that his best chance for survival and success lay in building an independent Eastern alliance. The relationship worked because both parties needed it to work, because the political alliance was strengthened by personal affection, and because genuine emotional bonds developed within the framework of strategic calculation. The comparison with Antony's relationship with Octavia illuminates the difference between political marriage and political partnership. Octavia was everything a Roman wife should be: modest, loyal, dignified, focused on domestic virtue. But she was Octavian's sister, which meant that she was always potentially a channel for Octavian's influence and a reminder of Antony's subordinate position in their partnership. She represented the Roman establishment that Antony was increasingly at odds with, the world of senatorial respectability and republican tradition that he had outgrown or rejected. Cleopatra, by contrast, was independent, equal in royal status if not in military power, intelligent enough to be a genuine partner in planning and strategy, rather than just a wife managing his household. She could discuss philosophy and governance, understand military logistics, participate in diplomatic negotiations. She was, in short, the kind of partner that Antony needed for the kind of life he was building, and Octavia was not. The tragedy of their relationship is that it could never survive in the political context of the late Roman Republic. Rome would not accept a powerful foreign queen as the partner of one of its leading men. Roman society could not tolerate a woman who wielded political power openly rather than influencing her husband privately. The Eastern alliance that Antony was building threatened the dominance of the Italian senatorial class and the centrality of Rome itself. Octavian understood this perfectly, and he exploited it ruthlessly. The propaganda war he waged against Antony and Cleopatra was brilliant precisely because it tapped into genuine Roman anxieties about gender, power, and cultural identity. By portraying Antony as enslaved to a foreign woman, Octavian could present himself as the defender of Roman values against Eastern corruption. The fact that this narrative was largely false did not matter. It was effective, and effectiveness was what counted. The end came at Actium in 31 BC and Alexandria in 30 BC, and even in defeat, the complexity of their relationship was evident. When Cleopatra's squadron broke through the enemy line and fled south during the Battle of Actium, Antony followed her, abandoning his own fleet and effectively ending the battle. Roman sources presented this as evidence of his enslavement. He could not bear to lose sight of her, even if it meant abandoning his men. But the evidence suggests that the breakout was prearranged, that Cleopatra was carrying the treasury, and that saving it was essential for continuing the war, that Antony's decision to follow was strategic rather than emotional. The flight destroyed his reputation and his army's morale, but it was probably the right decision in purely military terms. They escaped with resources that could have supported further resistance if the political situation had not collapsed so completely. The final months in Alexandria, after Actium, saw both of them preparing for the inevitable end. Antony fell into depression, building a house on a pier and calling it the Timoneum after the famous misanthrope. Cleopatra tried desperately to negotiate terms that would save her children and her kingdom, offering to abdicate, threatening to burn Egypt's treasury, attempting every diplomatic maneuver she could devise. They spent their last days together, still partnered in strategy, even as their situation became hopeless. When Antony received false news that Cleopatra was dead, he fell on his sword, an act that could be interpreted as either desperate love or a Roman soldier's acceptance of inevitable defeat. He was carried to Cleopatra's monument and died in her arms, their partnership ending with his blood soaking her robes. Cleopatra survived him by a few days, using the time to try once more to negotiate for her children's safety. When she realized that Octavian intended to display her in his triumph, she chose death by her own hand, probably by poison, maintaining control over her final moments as she had maintained control throughout her reign. She arranged to be buried with Antony, a final statement that their partnership continued even in death. Octavian respected her wishes, allowing them to be buried together in the mausoleum she had prepared, but he executed Caesarion and took her 3 children by Antony to Rome to be raised by Octavia, the woman Antony had abandoned. The question of whether theirs was a love story or a political alliance is ultimately the wrong question, because it assumes that love and politics can be separated in relationships at the highest levels of power. For people like Antony and Cleopatra, every personal relationship had political dimensions, and every political alliance was strengthened or weakened by personal affection or hostility. They needed each other strategically, and they appear to have genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They had children together as a political bond, and they probably loved those children as parents. They made decisions based on political calculation, and those decisions were probably influenced by emotional attachment. The relationship was all of these things at once, and trying to identify which aspect was primary or authentic misses the complexity of their situation. What we can say is that their relationship was far more sophisticated than Roman propaganda suggested. Cleopatra was not a seductress who enslaved Antony through beauty and sex. She was an intelligent ruler who offered him a partnership that served his strategic interests while also providing genuine companionship. Antony was not a fool bewitched by a foreign woman. He was a capable general and politician who recognized that his future lay in the East and who formed an alliance with the most powerful Eastern ruler available. They were partners in a political project that failed, lovers in a relationship that served political purposes, and 2 individuals who found in each other something that they valued beyond mere strategic utility. The relationship between Mark Antony and Cleopatra changed the course of ancient history, not because it was a great love story, but because it represented an alternative vision of Mediterranean power that challenged Roman dominance. If they had won at Actium, the Roman Empire might have developed very differently, more Eastern in culture, more monarchical in structure, more accepting of powerful women in political roles. Their defeat ensured that Rome would remain centered in Italy, that the empire would develop along the lines that Octavian established as Augustus, and that the memory of Cleopatra would be shaped by the propaganda of the victors rather than by her own voice. 2,000 years later, we still struggle to see past that propaganda to the real woman and the real relationship beneath it. We want them to be Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers destroyed by forces beyond their control. But they were not. They were 2 extremely intelligent, capable, ruthless politicians who formed an alliance based on mutual strategic interests, who developed genuine affection within the framework of that alliance, and who lost their gamble for power against an opponent who was slightly smarter and considerably luckier. The love was real. The politics was real. And the 2 were so completely intertwined that separating them is impossible and probably pointless. That complexity is what makes their relationship endlessly fascinating and what makes it far more interesting than the simple seduction narrative that Rome created and that we have inherited.